Back to another edition of The Sauce. I'm Derrick Maines. This is Andrew Kolikoff. How are you, my friend?
Good. How are you? We're overcoming technical issues.
I know. I don't know what it is with Cox and you. It's like it works and then it doesn't work and then it works and then it doesn't work. I don't know.
I'm going to drop a name. Welcome to Cox.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the big event you have coming up.
Big event. So big.
That's a big one, man. 6-0.
I'm gonna be 60 years old. And I feel great. I don't know. I feel like I'm still in my mind. I feel like I'm, teen. Let's go out and see some live music. Let's go have a couple of drinks. Let's talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about.
Oh yeah.
Still pretty active. Although on the tennis court it shows.
That's what you said.
Drag your ass out there one of these days. I know that.
No, I do not do that. I don't do pickleball. I don't do tennis. I'm a rower. That's what I do. I like to row for a little bit every morning, and that's my exercise.
See, I never liked going to the gym. I went for years and years. I had to because I was a competitive tennis player. But I am like a dog. I need a ball. I've got to chase a ball.
Yeah.
Just let me see the ball. Let me chase the ball, and I'm happy. It's just like awesome. A very primal thing for me. So
that's good.
So yeah. So I know what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about automation, and I think every business, no matter how big or small you are, because this affects businesses large, medium, and small. This is an all-inclusive subject for all audiences. Every business needs to have some level of automation. And the question is, they think automatically, they think technology. Well, I just got to buy something that's going to help me, some software thing that's going to help me do it. And what I think they don't really understand, and it's what I want you to start talking about, Derrick, is you've got to fish it first, your SOPs. You have to figure out what's actually happening before you can automate what's happening.
Absolutely. Well, I want to step back for a second because I've actually been writing some stuff on this topic lately. And I think if we think about the progression of business, so business has gone through in the last 110 years or so, it's gone through a pretty significant transition. I mean, if you go back to the early 1900s, we lived in a world where manufacturing, where everything was produced in a craft or artisan manner. You had a blacksmith in your village, you had a baker, a butcher, what's the other one? A candlestick maker. Everybody was a specialist. If you wanted if you wanted new clothes, you went to a tailor. Yeah. I mean, furniture was made. Everything was customized at a local level. And then we had the addition of what happened, in the early 1900s with transportation, with the train system coming into place, and all of a sudden, your market for selling goods wasn't just your neighbors. Your market for selling goods became larger and broader, particularly if you had access to the railway system. So innovators began to think about how they would do this thing a little differently. And the meat packers were big in making these transitions, coal, raw materials, oil. These kind of guys started thinking about these things and started figuring out how to make things in mass. And that really was Henry Ford is the one who really became famous for this. But, if you have to make one peanut butter and jelly sandwich back in 1900, you made one. And if two people wanted peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, well, you made one and then you made the next one. And what these guys said is, let's try to make 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at the same time. And then you had Henry Ford, who brought in just an incredible level of automation with a moving line and brought a lot of, he took what used to be done by one or two people, because he wasn't the creator of the car. Right? What used to be one or two guys would build a car or gals would build a car, he took it and broke it into 87 distinct steps, and it moved down the line. That was a huge improvement, and that started the Industrial Revolution here in the U.S. That was mass production. So you went from artisan to mass. Then in the 1940s, with the war effort, the American manufacturing understood you had to lean this thing out, right? You had to get really, really efficient so you could pump out volumes of this. And they began to do that. Early 2000s, we started to hear about the lean startup. I mean, that's what everybody talks about still to this day, the lean startup method, the one-page business plan, thinking about things from a lean perspective. And I think if we look back, what we have created is a combination of mass and lean that looks like that dude who like skipped leg day. You know what I'm saying? Like he's Arnold Schwarzenegger on the top, and then he's got like these two little sticks, going down at the bottom. So there's a very unbalanced system around not only American manufacturing, but really American business in general. We have this idea that we need to be really mass. We need to go to the mass market, but inside our businesses, we're trying to operate in a very sort of lean fashion. Really, what we've got to try to do now is figure out how to optimize. Right? We got to figure out how to start doing a little leg day, maybe lose a little bit of the bulk up top, even it out, get a little bit more attractive. And that's something that I think is becoming part of a movement. I think businesses are starting to recognize this, that it isn't always about perpetual growth. Some days you got to do leg days. The marketplace goes in fluctuations. It moves in ebbs and flows. It isn't just always this perpetual growth kind of concept. And that's a lot of what we do, right? That's a lot of what I do is try to get businesses to balance that out, understand how to bring automation in, understand how to bring innovation in, but do it in a very optimized way. Does that make sense, Andrew?
It does. And I think what we need to really talk about is what do you mean by optimized versus automated?
I think
is there a difference, and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I think what this means is that we've focused a lot of attention in our businesses on growing revenue, and we have tried to think about controlling our costs around controlling revenue, right? So we're looking at growth, but we're trying to do this lean growth method, this lean mass method. But optimization is different, because optimization is looking at your business and saying, let me get very, very focused on the things that from a business perspective, from a revenue perspective, make me the most money. And then how do I do those things in the most efficient, optimized way possible? I've been really turned on lately to this concept in marketing that I believe is relatively new. Luxury brands have been using this for a while, but this concept of repelling customers away from you, making sure that customers very quickly in the process self-identify as a potential customer of yours, or they move away very, very quickly. I think brands like, Hublot, the watch manufacturer, or Rolex, or Lamborghini, they have done these things through price points for a very long time. If you want a good Hublot watch, it's going to cost you $300,000. I'm not the customer, So very quickly, I'm met with a price that makes me go, yep, you know what? I'm good. That's not for me. So that's what I'm really talking about, is thinking about, instead of just trying to get the likes and follows and comments and get web traffic, because those are the things we all measure. We measure the likes, we measure the follows, we measure web traffic, we measure all these kind of things. And then we get disgusted when our conversion rates are low. Well, maybe what we should just try to do is help people self-identify really early in the process if this is the right opportunity for them. That would help us significantly, because it would reduce all of that input. We talk about pipelines and we talk about funnels. I want to put less in the funnel. I just want to get more out of the bottom. Does that make sense?
It does. The question is, how do you do that? And how do you do that with growth in mind?
Well, I think you have to look at growth as not a perpetual state of always going in an upward direction, but I think you have to move that growth needle in a couple of different areas in the business. First and foremost, yes, you need revenue, right? But then once you've got that revenue in the door, instead of always focused on growing the revenue, you have to look back down to the bottom line, and you have to say, what do I need to do to improve that? How do I improve the outcomes for me as a business owner by maybe limiting the number of customers, or maybe not servicing every single customer that's interested in me, maybe adjusting my prices or adjusting the way that we deliver the product to the marketplace that makes us more efficient and optimized. And I'll give you a great example. General contractors, there's lots of general contractors out there. General contractors, the holy grail for them is 3% margin. 3%, that's it. So they do a $100 million project. If they can make $3 million on it, they're thrilled. Why? Why is 3% the number? Well, 3% is an arbitrary number that somebody looked at the industry over a course of time, maybe 10 years, and said, well, the average is 3%. So 3% is the standard. Well, why is it not 6%? Why isn't it 8%? I mean, we've been set up for failure, right?
Well, it's a societal industry norm. And if you don't play at that level, you're not going to get work, because the people looking for general contractors, they know the numbers too. And
they know the top number. They know what I'm charging you. They don't know how much money I make. Like, see, this is the thing that I think people miss in this equation, is that if every dollar I save inside my company is like $10 in sales. Like, although I have personality for sales, I'm not a big fan of I'm not a sales guy, right? I'm an optimization guy. I look at it as, if I have 100 customers that come into my business and they're each paying, let's say, $1,000, and I have $100,000 in revenue, my objective as an operations leader is to make sure as much of that money stays inside the business. It doesn't flow through to expenses. It stays with me. To do that, I have to optimize that organization. I have to optimize the processes. I have to automate things so that more of that money stays with me and doesn't flow out the doors.
100%. I mean, with your example of general contracting, the bidding process, in America, we choose usually the low bidder. The low bidders are at or below 3%. And they're the ones that get awarded the job. So if you bid the job at 6%, you ain't going to get the work. So it doesn't matter what they know that you make. It's what the industry standard is. Interestingly, in Europe, they choose the middle bidder more often. They throw out the low one, and they throw out the high one, and they figure the middle one is probably about right. That's not how we roll in the States, though, unfortunately, in this industry.
But let's think about this in more general terms. The reality is if I save money inside my business and I make more margin, my client doesn't even know that. Right? So my price can be the same, or it can be less, as long as my costs are less.
Now that is that's a whole another subject, 100%. If you can optimize.
Well, that's where I'm driving this too, right?
Right. It's like, if you can optimize the business, you could be the low bidder, but still make 4 or 5%, right? And you could still make the most money.
Think about it, Andrew. And then on top of that, I could technically, let's just say that my objective, my goal is, or the industry is getting 3% margin, and I do $100 million at 3% margin. I'm better off doing 50 million at 6. I'm better off because I will make the same amount of money for half the frustration. So many times I see this with companies that we work with, that they say, well, here's all the business that we do. And they show me a P&L. And I'm like, okay, well, that's nice, but I want to see a P&L for each of these products and services. And they said, well, we just roll them all up into one. And I said, well, that's just fine. And in some instances, that's okay. But let's break it down and let's really look at each product and service. And I talk about this in my Lean Manager's Playbook book. I had a company that was losing significant money. And he brought me in and he's like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. He's like, when you look at our P&L, for some reason, we're losing money, but I feel like we're making money in most instances. Well, what we found is they were losing money, but it was only on one product that they sold. They lost all of the money in the company was being lost in doing one thing. All of the other things were making money, but that was being sucked up by that losing product. So that's why we have to get deep inside of the organization and we have to say, what do we have to do to optimize? We have this mindset. It's very, very unfortunate here in the West in particular that success means revenue growth. And you know what? I would rather have less revenue and make more profit. And everybody knows the common sense of this. But when I sit down with CEOs and I say, let's optimize your business, they say, great, what do we do? Get more leads? And I'm going, no, I don't want any more damn leads. I want to get less leads. I want to get higher quality leads. I want to convert them into higher margin customers. But for some reason, that mindset, I've struggled with this for 10 years trying to explain this.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, that you struggled. Well, I don't know how much you're really struggling because I think.
Oh, I'm not struggling. It's those people that aren't getting it.
By the way, are you referring to that book?
What's that? No, I was actually referring to Lean Manager's Playbook, where I talk specifically about that story. I thank you for plugging my books. I appreciate you for doing that. I've got a couple new ones that I'm working on right now. Later this year, they'll be out.
So, yeah, look, owners sometimes want to hear what they want to hear, or CEOs or executives. You take a slightly different approach, Derrick, but it makes obviously complete total sense. But most most businesses are like, I want to show this growth over the tenure of my leadership, right?
Yeah.
So no matter what you tell them, if it makes sense, they're still being looked at by their board or whatever in the old-fashioned way, right? Well, what did you do revenue-wise, So you've got some competing forces that they still have to produce those numbers while efficient, So some of those politics
it is absolutely a change. What we've got to start doing as an industry, as a business leaders, is we have to start pushing back on that, and because it's so logical. But for some reason, we don't want to do it. Think about if you own your own business, which you and I both do you give a shit about revenue, or do you give a shit about how much money you put in your pocket at the end of the year? I mean, revenue is a nice way to, say how big how big you are, right? I could go crude there, but it's just a way of measuring yourself against others. And I look at, there's an organization right now I was thinking about joining, and they have a threshold. For the business I was thinking about joining it with, it's a $2 million minimum revenue threshold. And I'm not going to reach that this year. I'll get there next year, but I'm not going to reach that this year. And I was a little bummed. I was like, it sort of sucks. I can't participate. Yet I'm consulting for people that are in that organization that are doing far more revenue than that are broke and are losing money on their business. So, you're successful. You can only join our group if you've got this level of. We don't give a shit how much money you lose. I mean,
are
that
you
to me
telling me, Derrick, that there's hypocrisy in business too? Is that what you're telling me?
It doesn't make any sense. Listen, I could have $10 million revenue next year if I want to give my shit away. I don't want to give my shit away. No, so I want to make money. I thought the objective of business was making money. Why the hell is it not anymore?
I almost think that you've off the cuff, that you've got to come up with a more branded name than just optimization. It has to be like a catch thing that people start, because everybody has their view of what optimization.
We'll call it leg
means,
day.
And
call it leg day.
Whatever it is, it has to have a name that means something, because optimization could mean anything. Right? It could mean whatever to whomever, sure, until you explain, So, I think that's on you to figure that out. But you should, because you're basically on an educational campaign. And look, you have been for years. You speak at Arizona Growth Advisors. Yep. You speak at many other things, and a huge component of what you do is educating first. Totally. Because it's like the answer that we seek is always right in front of our nose, but we never know it's even there. And you're telling them it's there.
I think I think you're right in the sense that I've got to figure out how to package this up and sell it. And I think sometimes it's the hypocrisy of it. And listen, I've raised money from venture capital before, from private equity before, from, individual investors. The first question they ask, what's your revenue? And what we should be saying is, oh, my revenue is $100 trillion and I lose $1 trillion a year. How does that sound? I mean, they would go, no. Well, I thought revenue was the most important thing. Wouldn't it be better if I said, you know what, I do $5 million a year and I'm making about 3.5, and they'd go, shit, okay, I want to scale that business. Why does everybody want to scale the business that has the big revenue, not the business that makes the most money? It's just fascinating to me. And listen, I will tell you, I work with I've actually recently taken on a couple clients that are under my sort of threshold, and I'm being exposed to that now. I love to tell people I like to work with companies between 20 million and about $1 billion in revenue. But I've had a couple people reach out to me lately that are in right around the $10 million range. And what I've found with those guys is I say to them, what's your revenue? My revenue is about $9.5 million. Okay, cool. What are you taking on the bottom line? I'm taking home about $4 million. And I go, yeah, I'm going to work with you, right? Because my $50 million companies aren't taking home $4 million.
So go ahead. I'm finished, but I have a question for you.
No, I'm done. My point is that we're so focused on this growth thing, this revenue growth, this market size piece. We keep forgetting about the fact that there's gold in these hills, and we're so speculative on the future, we forget what we're standing on.
Derrick, are you geeky enough to have figured out industry by industry what the ratio of revenue to net profit should be from industry to industry?
There's standards out there in the accounting and the auditing world. I just need to take a look at those, because I will tell you, I was speaking to somebody recently and I said, the GDP for the US is $23 trillion a year. And I will tell you personally, from experience, working with companies under that $1 billion range, that they all have 20 to 30% inefficiency. They could all reduce their costs by 20 to 30% relatively easily in the course of 12 months. So that means, and I didn't believe, because I have consulted for a few of the Fortune 5, I made the assumption that the under $1 billion market was where all the inefficiency was. And I spoke with somebody the other day that only sells to Fortune 100s. And he's like, I think they're worse than that. He's like, I just think they're worse. They just don't even know it. So if you think about that, that means in our economy, in our GDP, then that's a gross number. That means that there's $5 trillion a year in waste that's sitting there, that is falling off the sides of machines, that's not happening because people aren't optimized or efficient. $5 trillion a year that could be recovered as profit, not as top line revenue, as profit, right on the bottom line. But for some reason, everybody's ignoring it. And it blows me away. It really blows me away how few people talk about this.
I mean, to me, I think it would be interesting. I'm sure somebody has researched this, industry by industry, what that ratio would be of revenue.
I bet you ChatGPT can tell us.
Bet you. And that would be something that you want to come up with a name and brand that and say, oh no, our system, does that to what the ratio is, something like that, because that's easily understood and I think requires a little less education.
I think you're right. So, I think for the most part, you're right. I think once people experience it and once they understand how much inefficiency is in business, it is a little bit of eye-opening. And I tell, the analogy I gave to somebody the other night is I said, it's like you have really bad body odor, but nobody's ever mentioned it to you. And then when they mention it to you, all of a sudden you're like, shit, do I stink? And I think it's the same thing with this inefficiency inside businesses. So many times we have this, I used to call it ostrich management, that you were completely ignorant of the fact, or you were keeping yourself ignorant. But I think we've talked about ignorance before. We talked about ignorance on this show before, and about the, deliberate ignorance versus, I have to look up the word. It's like there's a way to think about ignorance where it's either intentional or unintentional. And I really just think people unintentionally are ignorant of how inefficient their businesses are. I thought for a long time they knew and they just ignored it for some reason. I actually think now it's acceptable. So because it's acceptable, people expect it to happen. And they're not looking for it because it's right there. It's sort of like when you're looking for a house, you see lots of houses for sale. If you're looking for waste inside your organization, you'll find it. It's there. It's all over the place, but you're just not seeing it because you're ignorant to it. You don't know where to look.
So, question, I don't know if this is the path you want to go down on the show, but all these companies have COOs or, a head of operations. Why, if they have somebody in that position that's supposedly their job, yep, why do consultants like you, Mark Riedel, who's traveling all over the world for billion-dollar companies, why are they plunking down all this money when they need somebody like you to come in and tell them what's right in front of their nose?
Because COOs are the most broad terminology of any of the executive suite. I know what a CEO does. They lead the vision and mission of the company. I know what a CFO does. She works on the strategic finance for the next 3 to 5 years, aligning with the milestones that the CEO has set up. She sits there and she says, I've got to figure out how our cash flow works. I have to think about our margins. I have to work on our budgets. I have to work on our costs. I have to do all those kind of things. I know what a CMO does. I know what a chief revenue officer does. I know what a chief technology officer does. What does a COO do? It's so broad and it depends upon the industry. If you're in manufacturing, a COO is running your Six Sigma and Lean programs inside your organization. If you are in technology, your COO is probably acting more like a president and is more like the right hand to the CEO. If you're in whatever industry it might be, you're doing different things in each one of these industries. COOs are one of the most difficult positions to fill because you could interview 10 highly qualified candidates that have way more experience than you ever need, and none of them meet the needs of your organization. So I don't even like the term COO anymore because I think it is taken on everything else that doesn't get covered by the executive team rolls up to the COO as operations, and it's just not what it is. There's multiple different roles and positions inside the office of the COO.
I understand that, but I know people like you that do what you do.
There's only a few though.
Provide come in, look at it, let's just get right down to the brass tacks of it and start looking for waste, immediate waste. And it just blows my mind how wasteful we are, as you had highlighted, but how few people know how to actually eliminate it.
It's unbelievable how few people are trained in how to find it, number one, because it is a perspective. And listen, I want to talk about this for a minute, and I know we're almost at 30 minutes already, but every person that's listening to this or will see this, every person in the world has a perception of the world. They see the world through their worldview. And there's lots of scientific research now that says about 80% of what we see isn't actually processed by the brain. Our brain fills in the gaps based upon the information that we have before. It doesn't process all of this information fresh every second, right? This is why sometimes if somebody moves furniture in your house, you're like, oh, that's off, like because the pattern is already there, right? So this is part of that challenge. Is we live in this constant state of perception. There are, and there's actually a guy out there right now. He's a former CIA guy that does a lot of podcasts, and he talks about how only about 2% of people have perspective. Perspective is very different. Perspective is not just saying I'll walk a mile in your shoes. Perspective is joining you in your shoes, getting inside your head, looking at the world through your world view, but also being able to take all of the bias of that person, all the perspective of that person, everything that's created their eyes, the way that they're looking out into the world, and assume that position for just a moment. So if you're walking the manufacturing line, you're not just looking at the people working on the line, you're getting inside their head. You're seeing the line as they are seeing it. And you're also processing the fact that your wife yelled at you this morning before you left, and you got to pick up your kids after work, and you're going to be short on paying the electric bill. You have to be in that, you have to get in that chaos for a minute or two. And then you have to look at the line and you have to say, what do I see as somebody who's here? And then you've got to take your perspective and apply it inside the brain of that person and say, okay, how do I see this now as I'm seeing through their shoes? That's a totally different thing. And it's very, very rare to find people that can do that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's effectively what I do when I go inside of organizations, which
you gotta get inside the brains of people.
I have to get the perspective.
Yes.
Through their eyes, through their lens, through their emotions, through their habits, through their behavior, all of it, and then put the whole thing together, because everybody, from a cultural standpoint, and an organizational standpoint that way. So you're 100% right, but still, I find it so, like when you tell me you get this client, you get that client, and I know Mark Riedel, and he's traveling all over the world, and he does very similar to what you do, and I'm like, my God! And then you tell me what you do, and he tells me what he does, and I'm like, this is not rocket science.
Very common sense. Very common sense.
Science.
And we got a question on LinkedIn, and I think it's a really good question. It's like, and this comes from Sven, who's actually on my team. He's a psychologist that works on our team. And he says,
okay.
do you think that someone benefits from this inefficiency? And is that why it persists? And I would say that I don't know if there's a direct benefit to anybody in the organization. Other than you could have frontline managers, and I have seen this is what we call the illusion of competency, where you have control over a chaos in a situation, and you don't want to correct that situation, because correcting it would potentially expose that all you really do is manage the chaos. Right? What would I do? And I had this happen just recently. I had somebody we were working on a situation with their company, and they said, well, what would I do if we actually fix this? Like, what would my job be then? Am I necessary?
That
I think there's
all the time when you're a consultant, which I come in, the initial reaction is, whoa, right? Like, you're potentially a threat, because you're there to assess the situation.
Yes.
and then provide that assessment with some solutions, and it's potentially a strategy to the powers that be.
Yeah, that's why one of the things I think I'm exceptionally good at, and I think people on my team are getting better at this too, is trying to understand what that person needs from a deeply psychological perspective, not just what they're saying they want. Like, yeah, it'd be nice if this was more efficient, but what do they actually need? And it might be that they need to know what their job would be after it. They need to know if there's opportunities to advance. They need to know that they're secure in their role. Like, they need something before they can truly allow that to happen.
100%. I tell them straight up, look, I understand if you feel that this may be a threat, but I'm actually here not only to understand your perspective, but I'm here here's your chance to be heard, to be seen, and to have the courage to do that. Because if you're courageous, I will take that information back. Right?
Sure.
It's almost like a moment of truth for them. And
you tell me, do you want me to give you credit or not?
What was that?
I said, you tell me if you want me to give you credit or not for it. Because sometimes I have people that say, I want to say this anonymously. Sometimes I have people that say, hey, I that's why you have to know what they need, right? Do I need to go back and say, hey, Andrew had this great idea on the line? Or do I need to go back and say, I was walking the line and there were some ideas that came up? And you've got to ask that permission of those people before you do that, because if you don't do that, you can betray their confidence, you can betray them,
right.
And you can really get shut down. I also think, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying, I think, for all the consultants out there, some are really good at that nuance that Derrick just talked about, but it's been my experience that most really aren't. They're there to shake things up in their mind and move pieces, things is, going to be move pieces around. But if you really, if this is an organization with a strong culture, you have to have those skills, because that culture will require you to have those skills.
Very true.
And, that, so anyway, that's something I wanted to mention.
I think the last point on that is, to the point that's being made here, who benefits from the inefficiency? I do believe that, and it's active and passive ignorance is what I meant to talk about earlier. I do believe that when you move something, so we can be passively ignorant of something. If I've never met a person from, New Zealand, I can be passively ignorant about what people from New Zealand are like. But once I've met somebody from New Zealand, in order to say I don't know what they're like, I have to be actively ignorant. I have to ignore it. I have to physically and mentally say, I'm going to shut that off. And I use New Zealand, but you could call it racism. You can call it anti-Semitism, whatever it is. I mean, there are people out there that are just passively ignorant. They just don't know any better. They've never been taught any better. And the point is that once they've been taught and exposed to the idea, if at that point they don't change their mind, then they become, we can call it immoral, we can call it whatever you want to do. I do believe that this is what happens a lot of times in organizations, is that they know something is wrong. But if they go and look, now they're responsible. They've got to be actively ignorant now to ignore it. And that's painful. And that's what the comment just said, right? The commenter just said here, this is Savannah. And he said, change is associated with danger. Let's be honest. So if I ignore the fact that I know that behind the curtain, something bad is happening, I can, from a moral judgment perspective, I can say to myself, yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay in the not knowing. It's when I know and I don't do something, that's when it starts to tear me apart as a human being. So I believe that there is a lot of passive ignorance in corporate America, disguised. I should say it's active ignorance disguised as passive. Say again.
That is an understatement.
Yeah, there's a lot of active ignorance disguised as passive ignorance.
I have a client that prides itself on its culture, on how well they communicate, on all these things. I mean, and let's be fair to this client, unnamed client.
Yes.
They are way better than most. However, that doesn't mean they don't have some shit to fix, and some serious shit to fix. Some of the shit you're talking about.
Yeah, totally.
And it exists no matter, even a good family where there's no drinkers and there's love and there's affection, still has shit, right? And they have to, and you either choose to work on it, you choose to be aware of the change you can move to, and ultimately, Derrick, it really boils down to the leaders, and they have to be the change they want to see in the company. And that's where it really happens, that the leadership team has to be the change they want to see.
And I think the great analogy here is, it's easy to think you're good looking if you don't have a mirror. So it's about facing yourself
in the mirror for the first time. So I never realized that my dog never saw himself in a mirror. I never did until I went over a friend's house and she had a wall-to-wall mirror in her room, and he flipped out. He was barking for a while. So anyway,
absolutely. So I think that's a really interesting point. This is really, and I think in closing here, if you own a business, if you have responsibility in a business, it can be dangerous to take a look, right? You don't want to look the dirty little secrets, the skeletons in the closet, because you do become morally responsible to fix those things. if you do. And I've had twice in my life where I've actually gone through the analysis part of the work that I do, taken it to CEOs, and they've said, I don't want to continue. I don't want to fix these problems. And they had to be really real with themselves. And they said, I don't want to fix these problems because by fixing these problems, I have to admit I was really shitty at this job. Like I wasn't very good at this job. And that's a real challenge and a real problem.
Well, I mean,
so I think we just got to be able to face the music.
There could be a variety of different things why they don't want to fix it.
Yeah.
But that was a great question. Thank you for that question. And by the way,
yeah, it was great.
You know, that would be one bit of advice I would give to anybody that would hire a consultant like me or Derrick is know that we are going to create change, or at least suggest change that needs to be created. And change is, if anybody ever told you any part of change is easy, they should be
shit.
They should be shit.
Read my book. Your entire evolution as a human being is designed to stop it from happening. So listen, Andrew, this was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. So great show. Awesome. Hopefully the video worked great.
I think it did this time. We're good.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Andrew.